Wes Craven's New Nightmare follows a fictional version of actress Heather Langenkamp alongside her fellow cast and crew members of A Nightmare on Elm Street as they are menaced by a demonic force that takes on the form of Freddy Krueger. So this film was directed by Wes Craven and it stars Heather Langenkamp, Wes Craven, Miko Hughes and Robert Englund. New Nightmare is often credited by horror fans as being Scream before Scream, and I certainly agree with that statement. And as much as I love Scream and think it is really smartly written, I much prefer New Nightmare. I think that this film is devilishly clever and one of the scariest in the franchise. I think this film is amazing. And jumping straight into the positives of this film, Heather Langenkamp portraying a fictional version of herself is incredible. She does a great job here. As far as I'm concerned, this is her best role in any of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. And it's all due to the fact that she has so much to juggle here, and she does it with ease. You can tell that in the 10 years that have passed since the original film came out, and now, at least now within the time of the film, she's grown up as a person. She's a different person. She's got a kid now. She doesn't really want to do much with horror. She's had enough of it. She's a bit more sensitive to it now that she's got a kid of her own. She wants to branch out and do other things. She doesn't want to just be known as that girl from A Nightmare on Elm Street. But yet she's still grateful that Nightmare on Elm Street is what gave her this boost into Hollywood. So it's a really interesting character that she has to play. And I'm sure she drew from a lot of real life experience from it. So it really feels like a character that is lived in. It feels like a character that is real. She does amazing here. The concept of this film, the meta nature to it, is so creative and interesting. The fact that we're watching the film that is being written by Wes Craven within the film itself is really mind-bending and really cool. And it really presents itself as though it could be real life too, because there's no opening credits, there's no title cards or anything like that. It really just throws you straight in and makes you think that you are taking a look into the real version of these people's lives as they start to be menaced by Freddy in the real world. It's really cool. It's just little touches like that, like not including any credits, that just make this film seem so much more real and makes it so much more immersive than it could be. And that meta concept allows itself to explore some really interesting ideas and concepts. This movie is jam-packed. Freddy Krueger follows Heather Langenkamp everywhere that she goes. Both literally in the film, she is being tormented and stalked by Freddy Krueger in her dreams, but Heather Langenkamp is also followed around by Freddy in real life too. People point her out as the girl from that horror movie, the one with the guy with the finger blades. And one interesting thing that I picked up on this viewing is how the film kind of can work as a commentary on one-hit wonder musicians as well. Like, you got Heather Langenkamp is basically just only recognised for A Nightmare on Elm Street. She even mentions that she's been doing some other work in TV, but no one really gives a shit. So when you apply that to, let's say, Soft Cell, they would be pissed. I'm assuming they would be pissed that only one of their songs got major attention. And that one song that got major attention wasn't even written by them. It was a cover. By the way, did you know Tainted Love was a cover? Now you do. My point being, Soft Cell probably worked 10 times harder and poured their heart and soul into a bunch of other songs that didn't even get 1/100th of the attention that Tainted Love did. They're just kind of known as the guys that did Tainted Love, the same way that Heather Langenkamp is known as the girl from that horror movie. New Nightmare also discusses the power of imagination, the power of stories, the power of movies and how they can affect you to a really interesting extent. Like, it's almost just like the film can be seen as a tribute to storytelling in general. Like, you've got all the Hansel and Gretel parallels when they realize that their lives are kind of their own version of Hansel and Gretel. I think that's really, really cool. It's just like stories that are so profound and so well written that they can literally, you can literally draw parallels from real life to those stories and make such a big connection with them. And just the straight up fact that this whole film is about a script that is so powerful and so real that it ends up coming to life. And New Nightmare also has the undertones of being a film about how a child can respond to the loss of their parent. And also how a child might respond to violent media at a young age, how it might shape them, how they might feel about it, how they might react to it, how they might start behaving. It's not explored that much, but it's certainly there. And I just thought it was worth mentioning because this film is so deep and there is a lot to read into, a lot more than you would expect to. I'm just trying to hammer home the point of how smart this film is and how much brains was actually used to create this film, unlike some other ones in this franchise. I love that this film shows a real appreciation for the fans too. There's just so many little goodies to spot as a Nightmare on Elm Street fan. You got Screw Your Past line. You have Lynn Shay cast as a nurse, and she was the teacher from the dream sequence in the high school, which that's just a little bit of casting that you're going to pick up on and like. Charles Bernstein's theme for A Nightmare on Elm Street is weaved in and out of the score very subtly, and Wes understands that fans clamoring for more and just demanding for more Freddy isn't out of bad intentions. It's because they love his creation so much. And he says that. He even says something like, the fans, they love Freddy, God bless them, they want more. He's not using it as a reason to complain. He's just saying that he does appreciate the fact that we, the fans, value his work. And without going into full-on self-deprecation, New Nightmare also is able to poke fun at itself as well. As I said, it's not to the point where it's basically just a complete teardown of the franchise, but it is to the point that Wes has a sneaky line of dialogue in here, having a crack at some of the later films in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, and I think it's good that there's a bit of humility there, a bit of humbleness to show that, yes, there was a fair few missteps along the way, and yeah, that did happen. We're not going to pretend as though it didn't happen. Miko Hughes is fantastic. I prefer him here than I do in Pet Sematary, but he's just fantastic. He feels like a real kid. He feels like a kid that would actually like horror in real life, and apparently he did. Apparently he would actually sit backstage and watch them put on Robert Englund's makeup every day, which I really find quite funny. Julie's kill is incredible. I just think it's so cool that you get to see the kill, you get to see Tina's kill from the first film, but from Freddy's perspective this time. So in the first film, she was being dragged by an invisible force around that you eventually learned was Freddy. But in this one, you can actually see Freddy standing on the roof, throwing her around and cutting her up. And I think it's just such a creative and cool kill. It's gnarly. It's right in front of Dylan. And it's nasty, but I think it's just so creative how they do that. I think that it's one of the standout kills of the franchise. Robert Englund does a great job as Freddy here. He's a different Freddy. He's a more muted Freddy. He's a scarier Freddy. He's a bigger Freddy. But he still is Freddy. He still may as well be. He still has his great silly little lines where he's like, hey,
ever played in the cat?
Or when he's got all the snakes and the weird creepy crawlers and he's like,
pick a pet for the rugrat, bitch.
He does a great job at reclaiming what made Freddy so scary and so funny while still making it not just a carbon copy of Freddy from the previous films. He's still a different entity. When the actors like Heather Langenkamp and John Saxon start reprising their roles from the original films, like when John Saxon starts calling Heather Nancy, it's legitimately badass. It gives you chills. You're like, oh yeah, here we go. This story has come to life. They are still them. They've still got it. It's just such a cool moment and I love it. And it leads up to one fucking awesome final showdown. It takes place in the deep pits of hell that the Freddy demon owns. You've got little references to the original, like when she's running up the stairs and her feet sink into the stairs. It's really mossy and moldy and slimy and there's all these snakes and weird shit crawling around. And even, again, going back to the Hansel and Gretel kind of thing, in the fire, like it's almost like a big furnace where Freddy is burnt. I really like that. I love the part where Freddy's mouth and tongue really just opens up super wide. You've got that. You've also got him with his outstretched arm. It's just a really cool, really tense final set piece that I love. Now, before I discuss my problems with this film, there is something that I'm actually really torn on with this film. And it's Freddy's design. Not the performance by any means, but just his design. He looks cool in shadows and in darkness when he's obscured by light. But when he's in the light, he's in the spotlight, you can see him in full detail. There's something not quite right about him. It just doesn't seem slimy enough. Maybe it just seems too perfect. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but I'm just a little bit iffy on his design. Again, in the shadows, he looks great, and Robert Englund is great as him. It's just when he's got the spotlight, he just doesn't seem as creepy as he could. And now, getting onto the negatives of this film, this is a real slow starter. Like, it takes forever for the first thing to happen. You've got the opening scene, which is a cool dream sequence. But then after that, it just pedals along at its own pace and takes fucking forever to get the ball rolling. And while I don't want character development or anything to be cut down just for the sake of cheap thrills, there's kind of a few parts in this film where it's just like, oh, we could just, cut a little bit of fat, just get a little bit of fluff, just trim it out a little bit. It just takes too long, it feels for me. It isn't as interesting as it could be. Once it gets going, it is incredible. But just the first 35-40 minutes, really, you do kind of have to just push through and just wait for it. Robert Englund, as himself, he's terrific. He's really good. He seems like the kind of person that you'd expect him to be. He is completely wasted in this film. He barely has anything to do. And it's just like, why? Like, it could have been so much more interesting. Imagine if Robert Englund himself, the man that plays Freddy, was faced with Freddy. That could have been awesome. But instead, he shows up at the funeral for Chase, and then he's on the phone with Nancy, and then he ends up painting this new demon Freddy, and then he's just tossed aside and never spoken of again. It's really disappointing. He could have been such a cool part of this film, but he's just completely wasted. And lastly, Wes Craven, incredible director. He's not an actor. He's not made to be in front of the camera. I'm sorry, but it's the honest truth. He is not an actor. So overall, New Nightmare is an awesome horror film that laid the groundwork for Scream, injected life into a more than dead franchise, and above all else, stands and holds up as a really effective, creepy, entertaining, and creative horror film. Wes Craven's New Nightmare is worth watching and worth buying. Thanks so much for watching my review of New Nightmare. In the next day or two, I'm going to be dropping both my review for Freddy vs. Jason and the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. I've got a whole ass with this because the month is nearly done. I wanted to do this all in October, but I've been dragging my shit. So look forward to those. I'll see you all then. Bye.